Hi there, it's Emma. I just wanted to include some disclaimers before the beginning of this episode. This topic includes spoilers to the following films, Get Out and Us by Jordan Peele. Hi there, it's Emma.
It's Jen.
It's Niko.
And welcome to the first episode of the Podling, Season 3. Woo! As the school year starts and fall begins, so does the beloved time known as spooky season. So, my friends, what are we talking about today?
You said it, Emma. Today we'll just be talking about some language used in horror movies and kind of what it means from a sociolinguistic perspective.
Very nice. We've prepared some research on various sociolinguistic aspects of horror films to discuss today. What is sociolinguistics, first and foremost? Can either of you define it?
Yeah. It's looking at how language is used and our attitudes about language when it comes to society and communities and with each other, I suppose.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Well, Niko had something he was very excited about.
Yeah, I'm really curious about what you were learning
It
about.
has to be in the context of some things you have to say, Jen.
Okay.
Okay, so Jen, you go first then.
Okay. So the thing I was looking at was Dracula. Right?
Okay.
And
Like the novel or the movie?
yes.
Okay.
Like, you say Dracula, it's everything. But I kind of looked more at the novel implications.
Because, it's different. Like, it's a lot
so
more in depth
different.
than the films.
Tell me
Yes.
about novel Dracula.
Okay, background. Bram Stoker, Irishman, 1897. The political atmosphere of the Victorian age. So it's basically just a lot of colonialism, and it's bad. The imperialism is bad.
Oh, yeah.
And so a lot of the people in England kind of feel guilty. They're like, oh my gosh, what if it's going to come and bite us in the butt? And so this big idea called invasion literature emerged.
Okay, go on.
And it's basically xenophobia in novels.
Okay, how?
It started with this first book. It's called The Battle of Dorking.
Dorking?
Reminiscences of a Volunteer, 1871. And it's basically a fictional novel where Germany invades England. And this sparked a whole bunch of fear of, like, other countries invading England at this time. And so, like, there's just a huge fear of foreigners and what they might, like, do to them.
Okay.
Yeah.
That adds up. It
Yeah.
really does.
Yeah, so everyone is really anxious about other foreign powers potentially, invading them. So in the context of Dracula, a bunch of stuff happens in the book, but the main thing is that Dracula ends up coming to England. He first goes to
So where's
Romania.
Dracula? So Dracula's from Romania?
I think Dracula is from Romania.
Well, the whole thing is, like, Transylvania, but Transylvania is Romania.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's
exactly.
Not very well hidden.
It's very, like, stereotypical. But no. Okay, so Dracula goes to England, and it's not subtle in the way that it's like, oh my god, scary Eastern European foreigner, a bloodsucker gonna get us all.
Okay.
And so it just really shows the xenophobia of the time and just fear of the community, I guess. Fear of
I remember thinking of Dracula and having us look at it because, it's so iconic hearing the accent or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I was
it
going to say.
is.
I feel like it kind of, like, instills that, like, a fear of Eastern Europeans for the Western Europeans, which
absolutely.
is really problematic.
It's so bad, yeah.
Did you do any research on that specifically, or is that just,
didn't.
like, a sub
I found,
thing?
like, a few things just about, like, Romanian stereotypes. And, but yeah, it's pretty obvious just, like, existing in the West right now because a lot of, like, villains and movies will have an, like, vague Eastern European accent. Like, I don't even know what they're going for sometimes.
Yeah.
Or even, like, the stereotypes put on, like, Romani people.
Oh, yeah.
That's a big thing, and
Yeah.
like calling them gypsies, which is a slur, derogatory term, basically just talking about Romani people and saying that they're thieves and scoundrels. When in all actuality, they're a highly oppressed people, and they are just that. They're people.
Yeah, they're people. Their
So
own
weird.
culture. It seemed like Bram Stoker, kind of admired it in the way, he, went to Romania and he studied it a bunch. But honestly,
He just used that knowledge for problematic behaviors.
I don't even know.
Unintentionally.
I don't know. His novel really reflects, the common people. But I can't speak for him. I have no idea what was going on in his brain.
Huh.
No.
Yeah.
Dracula, there's a lot of anti-Semitism in Dracula.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Would he be
Cool,
a-
not
a
cool.
Jewish
Dracula
Roman?
is...
Dracula's Jewish.
I
No,
didn't know this.
legitimately. In the novel, the ways they describe him are, very stereotypical,
Almost
subtle
like
nods at,
he's
Jewish
Jewish.
stereotypical
Okay.
traits.
I see.
Oh.
Yeah. So we've got a lot going on in Dracula.
It sounds like it.
Well, you know what I found, because I was looking at sign language, specifically ASL, in some horror movies, and I found quite a film that there is a deafula. I don't know, I really don't know the full history of when representation for sign language may have earlier appeared, but this was 1972, and it was a poor quality film.
I would imagine.
It was bad, but for what it's worth, Dracula was portrayed Dracula signed, and it was overdubbed with the Slavic Romanian accent.
Oh no.
Okay, this is
Okay.
complete side tangent, but I wonder when they're signing how they can portray that accent in their sign.
I wonder if they do aim for that. I was looking at other big movies that had ASL and that were also reasonably spooky,
Right.
or had monsters or such. There is if you've seen The Shape of Water,
I love that movie.
there's
A movie for the queers.
True.
yeah. There is so much in that movie that for anybody who's watched it, I'm sure there's a lot to unpack in many different ways. But the protagonist is mute.
Yeah, she's mute.
And so there's ASL, and there are many things, but what I was thinking was, since Defula came out in 1972, there's also sign language, American Sign Language has changed, as all languages do, but has changed a lot since even the 60s, which is when, the early 60s is when The Shape of Water was set. So the ASL used in the movie was specifically historical.
Really?
They actually did take that
They
time.
took the detail?
It's
amazing.
It's interesting. They did so many things that are really. They did many things very well. At the same time, there are some other big things that I got to read from points of view from people who sign, from deaf individuals, wonderful blogs and vlogs and all the things. Dogs.
Blogs, and dogs.
No, well,
Dogs with blogs.
because
Dogs with
you
vlogs.
have this idea where the leading actress, I forget her name, for the movie is the hearing, a non-disabled actress who,
You're like,
yes, she's a non-disabled actress who is then applauded so much for taking on the challenge of learning ASL, whereas many in the community would express the opinion that why didn't they use someone who
Yeah,
already
why didn't they?
signs? Exactly.
it is a really good
Exactly.
question. It's
And
very impressive, but also a
that's-
good question.
And that is it's like they give the Oscar to her. She got the Oscar for the best
Wow.
actress, which it's, I mean, it just
Great
brings
movie,
up a lot.
but still.
Just what we reward and who we reward.
There's a lot in The Shape of Water to talk about.
There really is. There's a lot of symbolism, a lot of weird details, linguistically speaking as well.
Oh yeah.
It's that some people would say oh, she was perfect for the role, which obviously doesn't take into mind some things I mean, we could just go totally into the movie, but what I think is most interesting is at the very end of the movie, when we're looking at this character who is mute, who is disabled or who signs, period. But at the end, she sings and dances in the water with this monster, and that's the only way in which she's portrayed as being free. And in some ways, perhaps that reflects the truth of society, that she is not accepted, she can't feel free in the society. But at the same time, it also perpetuates that, oh, that's the only place that disabled people belong, is underwater with the monster.
With monstrous
and that
fish
you can't
people.
feel like you can freely express yourself unless you are able to speak and sing.
Yeah, or like just the
Interesting.
whole like what's it called? We were talking about it in Anne's class. Oralism. Just the topic that like a lot of people, in order to think that like a language is, I guess, valid, they think that you have to speak it because just so many languages are spoken. But that doesn't really hold any value. Like, sign languages are just as valid as oral languages, but there's still like that heavy preference.
Yeah, there's
Bias.
prestige,
Yeah.
prejudice. Yeah.
I will say it is very disturbing to me that signed languages were not seen as valid or legitimate languages until like very recently.
I could go off on this, but I'm not going to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alright.
We'll talk about it later.
To connect to the other movie I'm so glad I finally got to watch was A Quiet Place.
Oh, that movie's so good.
I only watched part one, but I got to see what people were talking about. And the movie, if anybody hasn't watched, features family in a post-apocalyptic environment who can't make any noise or they will be killed by the scary monsters. So
Also, their daughter is deaf.
and yes.
Ooh, that's a very
And central.
It's a very,
yes.
very important point.
Yes, and central to the family and is that the daughter is deaf, and that they all sign. They all know American Sign Language. It's interesting looking at the use of it. From what I saw, just also from the takes of people in the community, it really seemed like people were like, "This is pretty good representation."
Well, yeah, because a big thing with that movie is that the actress who plays the daughter is actually deaf.
Exactly.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Just the irony of like the ASL speaking family with their deaf child. Usually in horror movies, they're the first to go. And like in society, they're the least valued. But in this specific situation, it's emphasizing like, yes, they're the only ones that are gonna survive. And it just kind of has that like,
Yeah, because they're intelligent and they're bilingual.
yeah, it has that good like,
Yeah, and it values and it normalizes it too.
Yeah.
And so then to look at it a little more critically, it's like the question comes up like, well, I wonder how well they really signed. And it seemed like in terms of Mr. Jim from The Office and
John Krasinski and Emily Blunt.
and Emily Blunt, who really fantastic actors. I respect them so much, and he also directed the movie.
Yeah.
So
It is his movie.
there is something really to say too, because he also encouraged the entire cast and crew to learn sign language and to communicate in sign. In part, but I mean, yes, you also have an actress who's deaf, but at the same time. But I am interested because as much as people who sign mentioned that, yeah, they found it all understandable in the movie. They also mentioned, it wasn't perfect, but that it was cool to see that, the reality for so many signers or so many deaf, hard-hearing individuals is they do not have, like, their mom and dad don't know how to sign. They don't learn how to sign.
Because of that oralism, it's just kind of like suggested or influenced that, you as, a hearing impaired person, you need to conform to the rest of society so that way they can understand you and you can communicate. And it's a big thing even within families with hearing parents. It's really odd.
Yeah, we talk about it a lot in communication sciences and disorders because half of us will be audiologists and the other half will be speech paths. And we all have to know about like deaf families and basically how to navigate these waters and make sure that like we are making sure that they know that we respect their culture, because it is so valid.
Yeah.
But it just gets so hard within like a clinical setting.
Oh yeah, I bet.
One thing, just to hop on back to my place, is there was I think there was at least one time I noticed, it looked, and I'm coming from very little knowledge of ASL, but it looked like I saw John Krasinski look at his sign, or like it looked to me kind of like, coming from a theater background, it looked kind of like how if you're more of a beginner dancer, you'll stare at your feet.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
It seemed like there was at least one moment, and I mean, granted, only one, but I was like, oh, I can see the moments where...
Yeah, no. I was in ASL 101, and the biggest thing my teacher stressed was, don't look at your hands. She said, look at their face, because a lot of, like, the meaning also lies in facial cues.
Yeah.
That is a big thing, yeah.
Cool.
I wonder if that would change the meaning of what John Krasinski was signing then, if he was, doing those beginner baby steps with ASL. Beginner baby ASL. Like, would it alter the meaning? I mean, I'm sure not, especially in this film sense, but I mean, like, if he was using it in like a realistic, natural situation, like, I don't know, I'm just curious about it.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about.
It did seem really good. It did seem really good for the most part.
I really want to see it. I still haven't.
Oh, you haven't?
And then I also looked, I mean, a bit of a tangent, but seeing how it's represented in media beyond the movie itself was like interviews with the cast. And interviews with the deaf actress. We should look up her name.
Look up her name.
We're saying John Krasinski.
The deaf
and Emma
actress.
John Krasinski.
That's
And
kind
the
of like
deaf-
insulting to her.
It really is.
No, exactly.
This poor girl.
Like, I didn't even remember John Krasinski, but...
I don't know any actor's name, so I'm just like, yeah, that's nice.
Millicent Simmons.
Millicent Simmons.
Yeah.
Okay.
When she was on interviews, like, I saw several, but, like, Good Morning America, for example. But all of them, the interpreter, there's no... She signs, of course, but she, I can imagine, has some ability to read lips, to read face, but there's of course a signer there interpreting what the interviewer is saying. And it's interesting to me that the interpreter is always off screen. And so that then she's always looking off screen to somebody, like, and that feels like a big othering thing. So that she has to look off screen because the host should just be, or the interviewer should just be able to be by themselves without a signed interpreter.
I love watching interpreters do their thing.
Awesome. Like WAP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But whenever I go to like any sort of event and there's like an ASL interpreter there for whatever speaker is presenting, like I just watch them the whole time because I'm like, this is so interesting, so cool to watch them do it. And like obviously it's delayed, like the way that they sign is because they have to, you know, process the information that they're hearing and then sign it. But I don't know, I always just find it really fascinating because I'm like, that's what, you know, the speaker is saying, but in sign. I don't know, I think it's really cool. And so like I think it's really stupid that they would do that because I would honestly prefer to watch the interpreter.
No,
personally.
I would too. and it's I think really lovely because at least there's the main family who all learned ASL,
which is great.
but specifically the brother.
And he's little too, right? Like he's like a little kid.
It's easy for their brains.
That's true.
Yeah.
Little sponges.
He like talked about how he had just learned starting with the alphabet and would like spell out words, and then she'd teach him the sign, and so now he's reasonably fluent, and they just speak to each other, which is another reason why I don't know if this is really actually a critique, but I wonder why in no interview, when he's also specifically talking about her, why he isn't signing, or if there is maybe...
Wait, are they actually siblings in real life?
No.
No.
But I don't know how the ASL community, because I know that's referred to as like SimCom. I don't know much about that, but about speaking and signing at the same time. I'm curious.
It's hard. I've heard it's very hard.
It's just the idea of it seems very difficult.
Yeah, and it's hard to get like the same concept across, it's
probably at least the grammar of one or the other or both breaks down, I would imagine. So totally makes sense. I was just curious about that.
Yeah, no.
Because it just felt like you had, ooh, look, you have this deaf actress in this representation, and she signs, and everyone's learning how to sign.
Mm-hmm.
But they aren't signing. You don't see the signing. She has to sign, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody else, we're not seeing anybody else.
Little performative.
Like, there's nobody else that's, like, actively communicating with her.
Yeah.
Like, they could at least show her translator.
That's what I'm saying.
Like-
I want to watch the interpreter. That'd be cool. Yeah, so I'll do my little spiel. It's not much, but
we already talked about Black ASL, so I think
we
it
did.
kind of goes nicely.
But also it goes into, because when we were talking earlier about A Quiet Place and how John Krasinski was kind of like making horror films more inclusive, making film in general more inclusive, working on revolutionizing the way that horror films are portrayed, especially when it comes to, making the bilingual family the only survivors. Well, I looked at Jordan Peele and his films, and basically a big thing with the movie Get Out, if you don't know, Get Out is basically a film about a black man who is dating a white woman and goes with her to her very wealthy white family's house for a weekend, and it ends up being that this family is extremely racist and is basically using black people to make, like, hybrid mutant humans.
Ugh.
It's a whole thing. You should watch the movie if you haven't. But basically the point of Jordan Peele's films, now he has 3 of them, and also helped produce the new Candyman movie, I found out.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. But basically the whole point of Jordan Peele's films is that he's kind of revolutionizing the way that race is portrayed in horror films specifically, and kind of changing the narrative on how black characters are portrayed. So for example, when you think of any horror movie that has any black character in it, are they the lead or are they the side character?
They die first.
Yeah. Yeah. So they typically are the side characters, very minority characters, and they usually, if not always, will die first. And so that's kind of a big thing that Jordan Peele wanted to tackle, is because, like, why is it this way? And basically the whole thing with previous films is that these black characters are portrayed as being the ones to first realize that something is very wrong, and then nobody listens to them, and then they end up getting killed first.
Mm-hmm.
And but I love Jordan Peele films because it kind of, like, if you weren't already aware of this stereotype of black characters, he kind of, like, makes it really, really obvious, because in all of his movies, black characters are the main characters, the majority characters. White people are the minority, and or they're typically villains, which is really funny to me. I think it's great. But so specifically in Get Out, obviously, there's actually is a lot of white characters, but none of them are main characters except for the bad guys, which is really cool. And so also in Get Out, there's this sidekick comic relief character, Rod, who is the main character Chris's best friend. And basically Rod's whole thing is that he's house sitting for Chris and watching his dog while he's at this racist white family's house. And basically the entire time, even before Chris goes, Rod's like, no, you should not go, because these are a bunch of racist white people, and they're gonna kill you or try to sell you into slavery or something. But it's really funny because he goes about it in a really, like, comical way, and Chris is just like, no, man, you're crazy. But it's also interesting too, because even though the white people in the movie are the bad guys, and they're actively trying to kill specifically Chris and all the other black characters the entire time, pretty much, Chris and Rod, the main black characters, are the only ones to survive at the end, which is cool. So he's kind of, like, flipping this narrative by using black characters who, use AAVE. I also think it's really interesting because there's one part where Rod said sidekick comic relief best friend character. He realizes that something is very wrong because he hasn't heard from Chris in, like, 3 days. And so he goes to the police. And originally he's, like, code switching using standardized white English, basically, to talk to these people. And then a black male officer walks in the room, and then he immediately just goes back to normal. I think it's really funny because it's kind of like making code switching really obvious to people who otherwise wouldn't know that it exists. Mm-hmm. I also talked a little bit about the movie Us, which is also a Jordan Peele film. And Us is really interesting because it kind of looks at the idealized, like, American dream and, like, being an American in, like, as a black person. Mm-hmm. It's not a very obvious theme, but I was reading, like, a blog post where somebody was talking about it, and basically it was, like, how, because in the movie, the main character, Adelaide, she has her doppelganger who's evil and has, like, this raspy, like, guttural voice because of a injury. Basically, it's this whole thing. The movie's really good. You should watch it. But basically, they were talking about how this symbolism and of the tethered people, which is, like, these doppelgangers in the movie Us, how they live in, like, an underground bunker or something. And so that mixed in with, like, the damaged voice is talking about how black people are often shoved down and made to feel less important and treated as less important, and obviously historically through American history. And so it's basically these people were talking about how in Us it's kind of like the black experience in America, low-key. And I was like, that's really interesting.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
I'd have to watch that.
Oh, it's good. And then also the new Jordan Peele movie, Nope.
Yes, I
recommend that one.
So bad.
So good. But basically that one's the whole thing too, because it's again taking that narrative of the black minority character being like, something bad's happening, we should get out of here, and then the white people are like, no, it's fine, and then they die.
Yeah, like the voices of, like, what black people say is not as important as what white people say.
Yeah, so then
it's institutional.
Yeah, so then in Nope, it kind of flips that, where the big theme of the movie is, nope, I'm not doing that. And so, like, my favorite part was there was, like, the main character, he's sitting in his truck, and there's, like, something creepy happening, and it's coming towards him. And he's, like, sitting there, and he's staring off into space just watching it, and then he goes, shakes his head and goes, nope, and locks his truck door. And I'm like, what is that gonna do? But it's just the point, you know, it's...
No.
Yeah, it's like, I'm good.
I'm not messing with that.
Yeah, and so even as much as they try to get away from it, they can't, because this creepy thing is invading their house. And they're like, well, I'm not gonna give up my land and, you know, everything that I have and what I've built for myself. And so they're kind of forced to confront the issue. And then, you know, end up being pretty much the only successful ones in the entire film. But I just love Jordan Peele's movies because he kind of flips that narrative, but, you know, still has you sitting on the edge of your seat because you're, like, wondering what's going to happen next, even though he kind of has similar themes in his movies. And it all revolves around race.
It's really interesting to me because, like, speaking about voice and like, not being able to express yourself in some way or another as a device in these movies, or just literally in these movies.
Yeah.
And seeing that also in its own way come up in A Quiet Place, and where I think two interesting things kind of show up with this, where one, you have a family with only one person who's deaf. The daughter is deaf, and she still can sign, but the rest of them are not able to speak or express themselves as they would otherwise, which so much more commonly would be the other way around.
Yeah.
Where someone in a minority language, minority variety, or communication system is not going to be the one who is able to express themselves fully in any environment. And I think that's cool. Also, where there is an interesting point also that comes up in there are times in which then, like, these characters are able to speak suddenly. They are allowed to speak because of circumstances, and how in some way that like is connected to, like, emotional release and ability to be like freely expressive always But I wonder, I mean, that just might be the truth of someone who speaks.
I don't know. It's a whole thing, and I think it's really interesting that basically the similar theme is portrayed in all of these movies that we've talked about.
Yeah.
Especially
Race.
Especially Defula. That's what I said.
Spatula.
Especially Defula, obviously. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's really interesting that this is a common theme, but it's mostly in these movies that are like trying to revolutionize kind of the way that films are portrayed. I do think it's really interesting with the Shape of Water thing, though, about like kind of the ableist tendencies, it seems, with the not disabled actress, the only being accepted when you're out of public eye. I don't know. Kind of weird. But yeah.
They also, horror movies like Latin.
They really do. Oh,
I
yeah.
love Latin.
You should definitely check out The Exorcist and its use of Latin, specifically with
The possessed little girl.
with the deep voice that speaks Latin. It's really scary. What is it called? The study of like speaking in tongues?
Oh, that's glossolalia.
Glossolalia?
Yeah.
It's kind of a religious thing, I've noticed.
Yeah.
Same thing with just the use of Latin. Very connected to the power of the church, and
But that's a whole other thing.
that's a whole other thing.
And highly debated. Well, I think that is a great place to wrap up our spooky conversation today. Have you heard about any of this? Have you experienced any of these things or noticed any of these things in horror films that you've watched?
Or in
If
real
so,
life.
yeah. If so, feel free to send us a message on Instagram or comment or whatever. Send us an email. I don't know. Make sure to tune in next time to see what we talk about next.
And as always, make sure to check us out on Instagram at WWLinguistics to see what's going on in our department, as well as just in the general linguistic world.
And make sure to hit that follow button wherever you get your podcast to find out when the next episode comes out.
We'll see you next time. Tschüss!
Adios!
Ahoy!